Hi, this is Travis here at ExerciseLab with another video for you guys. First video of the year. I'm a doctor of physical therapy for those of you who don't know me. And so today I want to talk a little bit about some old school exercises that maybe get some attention in the gym, but maybe not as much attention as they should. I feel like it's a new year, so maybe we should start with some older things. Some exercises really haven't changed that much, but there's some exercises I don't see a whole lot in commercial gyms, or maybe I'll see once in a while. But I feel like could be a nice way to sort of mix up your training routine. I'm not personally a huge fan of New Year's resolutions, but that being said, anytime you're trying to get on the bandwagon, get back to being better, I don't think that's a problem. So, I'm not necessarily going to bash people who are making one, and I want to make sure you guys are getting off to a good start. So for those of you who maybe want to mix things up, go ahead and stay tuned, and we'll get started. Okay, so I'm going to show you two exercises here, primarily for shoulders, and I'm going to show you the one I think is a little bit simpler first. So there's these two presses. We call one the Arnold Press, and we call another one the Scott Press. And so the Arnold Press is probably the one that I see done more commonly. The Scott Press I very rarely, if ever, have seen done. It's kind of a complicated movement to actually do well. It takes a little bit more of a learning curve, and it's a little bit awkward, to be honest with you. But if you can do it well, I've actually found that I was actually surprised by how good of a job it does recruiting the muscles it says that it will. So I'll be talking to you about how to do that one in a minute. I want to talk about the Arnold Press first. So the Arnold Press is essentially a military press, or what's often called a military press, which is really just a shoulder press. What you do is you take two dumbbells and you just press straight up overhead, right? And many of these are done standing, although you can certainly do them seated as well. And so what you're going to do with this now is you're going to just bring those dumbbells in the front. And so to show you, and I'm not going to use a lot of weight just for demonstration purposes. So a standard shoulder press would be something like this, okay? If I were to do this standing up, where the dumbbells are just sort of in line with my torso, and I'm just pressing that straight up overhead. Now the Arnold Press added this extra dimension of bringing them down around to the front. And so from there, you can kind of press something like this. And I'm not going to a full lockout. I'm basically going to where my arms are almost straight, but I'm still preserving that tension on my, deltoid muscles. And I'm just coming around overhead like that. And so that's the Arnold Press. And what I'll say is, when you bring the elbows around like that, we tend to call that horizontal abduction of the shoulder. It tends to be a function more of that, posterior rear deltoid, some of the rhomboids and some of the scapular muscles if you're bringing your shoulder blades with you, okay? But that's going to be most relevant when you're pitched forward. So if I was doing a movement like this, or, sort of as you might do with like a bent over fly type movement, that's going to be quite a bit of rear deltoid. Now, with dumbbells, unlike, bands or pulleys, which you can play around with the angles and the force vectors more, gravity is always pushing down this way. So when I'm adding in this extra element, I'm still primarily fighting the force, downwards. And so the additional recruitment I'm getting, say, of my medial and posterior deltoid is fairly negligible. So if you really think you're getting a lot, the whole shoulder as you're doing that movement, I'd say not really. And so for that reason, I'd give that exercise a little bit of a ding. Now, that being said, one of the advantages, and some people will talk about this being maybe something that they'd see as a disadvantage, is that you're going to use a little bit less weight. And so I think really heavy overhead pressing. So if I'm doing a more traditional shoulder press, and especially if I'm seated, I'm going to be able to go quite a bit heavier on that movement. And I think for a lot of people, really heavy overhead pressing can be problematic for a number of reasons, and I've spoken to that in some other videos. You guys can certainly check that out. But what I'll say for the fact that you have to lower the weight, but you still can achieve a high degree of muscle fatigue, and you also can achieve a pretty good mind-muscle connection. So when I actually tried doing the Arnold presses as opposed to more conventional, I will say with a more conventional press, I do feel a bit more just anterior deltoid, versus when I'm doing that Arnold, that little extra movement, I do feel a little more of a generalized, contraction. I think that's probably what Arnold felt and why he ended up incorporating that movement. And, you can't argue with his results. So there may be some additional shoulder recruitment, and I think it also just helps to really feel the muscle working. So you can kind of flex the shoulders, I feel like, a little bit more with that little extra maneuver there. And so again, bodybuilders are not as concerned with moving massive weights, although many of them did. Powerlifters, their whole thing is moving the most massive weight possible, whereas a bodybuilder is really trying to achieve, again, more of that muscle fatigue, that muscle breakdown type of feeling, that mind-muscle connection to achieve muscle hypertrophy, which is a little bit of a different thing. And so the fact that you can lower the weight and still achieve that, I think, is actually a plus with the Arnold Press. And for that reason, I would say I'm going to pepper it in my routine once in a while. Now, from that, I think actually kind of that evolved from this movement called the Scott Press, which is sort of awkward, and that might have been partly why Arnold didn't do it. What I will say, and I was quite surprised, it does do a nice job recruiting that medial deltoid, kind of that middle head here, which I wouldn't have thought initially. And so the way this works, I'm going to show you from the back because it's a little easier to visualize. You sort of start out with your pinkies, facing up like this, and then you do a maneuver kind of like that. Okay, so my elbows are actually staying bent, and I'm more pushing kind of up and back and trying to squeeze the shoulder kind of middle deltoid part. Okay, you're not going to be able to use a ton of weight on this one by any means. It's a fairly awkward movement, but the nice thing is I actually really do feel that pretty nicely in that region that I'm basically trying to recruit, which is that medial deltoid. And medial deltoid, conventional exercises are like side laterals or maybe upright rows, which is a nice exercise that I talked about in another video, or it can be at least. And so this exercise is completely different from that. It's a very different movement pattern, but you really can't argue with the fact that I do feel it a lot there. And so what I would say is because you're using less weight, it lends itself quite nicely to like a compound or a superset. So what you might want to try and do, for instance, if you're a little more advanced and you really want to achieve that sort of burnout feeling, is do your Scott presses, just to show you a few more. Again, it is kind of a awkward and unique movement. Okay, then come down in here perhaps, and then do your side laterals. Okay, and that would be a great way to just really hammer the middle part of the shoulder. And again, the reason you might want to do that is because that does give you a little more that width, that definition, that medial deltoid. So if you're looking to see some developed shoulders, that's actually a great exercise to do it. So I was pretty surprised. Like I said, we learn primarily this is what that medial deltoid is going to do, and it does. But that whipping motion of kind of moving up and overhead like that, for whatever reason, does seem to do a nice job, making you really feel it in that area. So I have to believe it is working. It'd be great to actually do kind of an EMG study and see if that's the case. But for now, I would say actually I'm going to probably try to pepper it in my routine a little bit this year, and I'll let you guys know what I think. But for now, I'm actually going to give it a try. So that's the Scott press in a nutshell. A little awkward. I would say, maybe go ahead and watch that video a few more times. Pinkies are basically facing up. So just remember that as you're doing it. But obviously, if you're not feeling that one in the right spot, I don't think it's necessarily going to be the end-all, be-all by any means. People have certainly built up great physiques that have never touched that exercise, I would be guessing. Larry Scott obviously had a fantastic physique, though, so, I don't know how much of a player that exercise was, as far as percentage-wise, how much did that help him? But, certainly he had a physique that could pull it off. That would make me think that maybe there is something to it. So all that being said, that's the Scott press. Okay, so next in the lineup, I remember Frank Zane saying this is one of his favorite exercises, or what he attributed some of his tricep development to. He had a fantastic physique all the way around. Certainly had some great triceps. It very well could have been genetics and other things, but he liked tricep kickbacks. I feel like it actually gets kind of a bad rap. One of the things that's often criticized for about tricep kickbacks is that it's very limiting by the deltoid. So let me show you the movement, and then we can kind of talk about what I'm talking about. So the movement is you're going to essentially bring your arm in line with your torso, roughly, lock that position in, and then extend your elbow, okay? And so because I'm having to maintain that position with my shoulder, I'm having to isometrically work my deltoid quite a bit and some of my scapular muscles there to hold that. And so people see that as kind of a bug rather than a feature of this exercise. So you lock that in here, and then again, I might use just a little body English. I'm not going to really be, flailing this thing around, but I'm just trying to, essentially dial it in on that tricep. Give that a good squeeze. Okay, and that's how you would do the tricep kickback. Now, what I actually like to do, if you have an adjustable bench, is put my hand up a little higher. I just feel like it gives me a little more control, and I feel like I can just kind of dial that in nicely. So sometimes I'll do it this way, actually. And so what I would say on this exercise, because of the fact that you are going to be more limited, no question, by that shoulder, you may want to think a little bit more about how you're going to program it. And so if you have an exercise workout where you're going to try to emphasize shoulders, or again, this exercise is probably not going to be done exclusively. Certainly Zane did not do this exercise exclusively for his triceps or the rest of his body. And so what I would say is, if you're going to do this exercise, maybe after you've already done, say, some heavy pressing, and so you've already sort of pre-exhausted the triceps, that can be a nice way to do this, because then your triceps are already tired. And at that point, they're not going to be way stronger than your deltoid. Maybe it might even be the other way around, where your deltoid has a little more gas in the tank than your triceps. And so the triceps will end up being the limiting factor. And so you have to think about it from Zane's perspective. Again, he was a bodybuilder, not a power lifter. So he wasn't necessarily going to maximize the amount that he lifted. He was going more to try to really achieve that high degree of muscle fatigue, really good mind-muscle connection. And I think this exercise can do that for you. So in that sense, I think it might be an overlooked exercise or sort of an underutilized exercise. And so, it's always nice to identify weaknesses. And so if you're really having a hard time with this exercise, that may also suggest, having a little bit more strength in those deltoid muscles, could be a good thing for you. So I would say don't shy away from this exercise. Try to work on it and see if you can build up some of that isometric strength. And then eventually, as you get better at it, you may, see some of those results, or at least, feel what Zane was talking about. So that's the tricep kickback in a nutshell. Okay, so next one in the lineup, this is actually one that Arnold showed in pumping iron. It's called a concentration curl, and concentration curl is a term that gets labeled basically two different exercises that are kind of similar but a little different. The way he did it was more what I call the dangling version. So essentially what he does in the video, and he does a better job demonstrating this than I do, so if you can watch pumping iron, you certainly can check that out. The arm dangles, and then you just bring it up to the front of the body, okay? His back is pretty rounded when he does it, but I'd say keep your spine a little more neutral just for back health. And that arm just pretty much dangles, perpendicular to the floor. And just try to really think about squeezing and flexing that bicep, just to show you a different angle. And again, if you're in a commercial gym, you may not want to hold on to the rack. Maybe get yourself on a bench or someplace away. You can do this a little bit more. And so, again, this would be doing the other side. I'm just kind of letting that weight dangle down. And then, again, just to show you one more angle on this, if I were to hold here, it would be something like that. Okay, and so again, just trying to really flex that bicep area. Now, the way it's more conventionally done these days is on a bench. And so the way it's often done, and this is actually a nice variation for somebody who has maybe some low back considerations, because you can stabilize yourself pretty well. So if I'm going to work my right arm, I bring my elbow sort of the inside of my knee. Sometimes people put the hand, or you can stabilize it on elbow. That part's kind of up to you and whatever feels best. Once you've locked in the position, then you just bring that weight up, okay? And so again, try to keep that tension in the bicep, not really resting much at the top or the bottom. Just giving it a good flex, okay? And then to show you the other angle, you just do the same thing on this side. Again, I'm on my hand now, but I could also be on my elbow, just somewhere out of the way, okay? One thing I will say, though, is that for whatever reason, when the arm is dangling, kind of like it was in the first version I showed, the way Arnold does it in pumping iron, it does seem to, for whatever reason, give me a little bit better contraction of my bicep. So this version here, where I'm more stabilized, maybe because I'm kind of, helping out with my deltoid by pushing here, and I'm stabilizing here, I'm just getting more recruitment of other things, perhaps. And so perhaps that's maybe diminishing a little bit of what's happening with my bicep, maybe. Versus when I'm doing that dangling version, there's really not a lot going on other than just, me really flexing that bicep. And so at least from a mind-muscle connection, maybe there's just less noise, and so you're able to really dial that in. That being said, if you do have low back considerations, then maybe you want to do this version because obviously you're way more stabilized, and so that might be the way you have to go. But I would say you could experiment with that. But again, in my personal experience, I like the dangling version. But again, that would be considering I don't have any injuries or anything I'm really worried about. If you keep your neutral spine, though, I think overall you should be fairly safe. But again, test it out and see what you think. But that's the concentration curl in a nutshell. All right, so last one I want to show you guys. This was another pumping iron exercise, and basically what Arnold does is he just does a cable crunch. Essentially using a rope, which is, this is similar, and he just basically brings his hands down like this, okay? And the idea here is that I'm trying to use mostly my abdominals, obviously because you're holding on, it's tempting, and I see people really, kind of bring their hands down, and they're basically doing almost like a pull down type of movement, but you really want to mostly use your abs on this. Now, in this case, it would be nice if I had a pulley system that went up a little bit higher, because I'm kind of running out of room. So the only way I can mitigate that with a lower pulley system is I'd have to move back a little bit more. And that's fine to do that, if that's what you have to do. Because you want to be able to come up, sort of high before you come back down. But my body is still a little bit puckered at the top of the movement. But all that being said, that's just a nice way to recruit the abdominals. I found this exercise to be somewhat helpful also for people who have some low back considerations, as opposed to like a conventional, sit up, or certainly a Roman chair, which was done in those days a lot. So this one's a little bit more, I would say, low back friendly. You almost get a little bit more of a decompressive element with the pulley system. And so it's just a cool way to, work the abdominals. A lot of guys do like to do it because if they're using a weight stack, typically they can put a lot of weight on here. You don't have to go super heavy on this one. I think it's probably better to just, feel a good contraction in the abs. your rep range maybe a little bit on the higher side, 20, 30, but I wouldn't do hundreds of these things. So keep the volume sensible. Just kind of a cool way to hit the abs, get the washboard before summer. Still got some time for that. So give this one a try. Okay, so those are basically the exercises for today. So just 5, tricep kickbacks. We also did the Arnold and Scott press, doing some concentration curls, and then we finished off with the, cable crunch, as that's often called. And so that's it. Some other honorable mentions that I didn't talk about in this video because I wanted to give you guys some new stuff since it's a new year. Upright rows are great. Dumbbell pullovers are great. So I've talked about those in other videos. What I'll say for now, though, is that I think that if you can do these exercises, that's great, but really you have to build that foundation. So if you're just getting started, you really need those bread and butter exercises. So you can't get away from your staples as far as really building that strength foundation, your squats, your lunges, your deadlifts. Basically you've got to be working on some good pushes and pulls. You really want to build up that foundational strength. Once you've sort of conquered that, got that under your belt, that's where some of these accessory exercises I think can be helpful. And so again, for those of you who are looking to more aesthetically develop your physique, that's where I think some of these can help. I don't think this is going to be a deal breaker as far as, just getting fit in general. So if you didn't do these exercises, I don't think it's going to be a deal breaker. But for those of you who are looking for that little edge in some of the departments I discussed in this video, it can be a helpful thing to do. And again, it's nice to just have some varieties from time to time. As you probably know from this channel, a lot of variety. I do a lot of different exercises. And that being said, I'm not always doing different exercises. I always pretty much have my staples, and that's where I sort of track my progress. And then from there, I have my accessory lifts. And I think that's a pretty good way to do it, at least as far as the strength training component is concerned. So all that being said, maybe at some point I'll talk a little bit more about programming. But for those of you who are a little more advanced, want to try something a little different, or maybe exercise you forgot about but you'd seen a long time ago or done a long time ago, and you're like, oh, hey, yeah, I remember that exercise. Maybe this rekindled an old flame for you. So all that being said, Happy New Year from ExerciseLab. I certainly wish you all the best. More good content to come, rehab-related content, just kind of novelty exercises and things of that nature. I still have my BFR video, so all in the pipeline. And as always, hope you guys have some fun.